Welcome to the Evolved Caveman, where men learn to be successful and happy with your host, Dr. John Schinnerer, as he shares the most impactful ideas and practices for you to get the most from your relationships, your work, and from your life. Now here's Dr. John.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the latest episode of the Evolved Caveman. And today I am really excited to have with me JoAnna Brandi. And JoAnna is a certified Chief Happiness Officer, a happiness coach, and a specialist in creating customer happiness. She is the author of 2 books on customer loyalty, as well as an illustrated gift book, 54 Ways to Stay Positive in a Changing, Challenging, and Sometimes Negative World. She works with companies who want to energize, elevate, and empower their people to take exquisite care of their customers and their employees as a strategy to create lifetime value and property. She's been in pursuit and support of the positive spillover effects of a happy workplace culture since 1990. Welcome, JoAnna. Thank you for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you today?
Good, thank you. So let's start off by telling me a story of you at your very best.
Okay, that's actually easy. I did it last week. When I'm at my best, I'm standing in the middle of a group of people, facilitating a discussion or speaking.
Okay, so what about like a story of struggle where you start off with a difficulty and you overcome that difficulty?
Well, that is a story of struggle. When I was very first asked to do public speaking, I was still in the corporate world. Okay. My CEO came in and said to me, we had co-CEOs, a male and a female, and my CEO came in and said to me, I'm stuck on Thursday night. I need you to go do a speech. And I just looked at her and said, Thursday night? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm busy. And after this happened 2 or 3 times in succession, I got a call down to the corner office. And she said to me, look, something tells me that you're afraid to speak in front of people. I said, no, I'm fine in front of people. I mean, I run a sales department. Well, I was fine as long as there were no more than 6 people in the room. So she basically told me in no uncertain terms that speaking in public was part of my job. And I'd been doing that job for a really long time. I'd never been asked to speak. Well, other people had asked me to speak in public, and I just said no. But this was the first time that she had asked me. So I had to start getting out there and speaking in public. And without exaggeration, for 4 years, every time I had to speak in public, I got physically sick. Mm-hmm. Every time. It was for me the worst situation anybody could have possibly put me in. And then about 4 years into it, I'd quit my job. I'd started my own business. I'm now needing to speak in public so people can find out who I am. I am on a plane to Hawaii to a conference, and I'm reading a book. And the flight attendant looks down at the book I'm reading, and she looked at me. She goes, "That book is going to change your life. It changed mine."
And the book was?
Creative Visualization.
Yeah.
The first book out there, Audit. And all of a sudden, I was, determined to read that book and find out what it had for me. And all of a sudden I realized, oh my God, I've been visualizing, tripping, falling, stumbling. I've been visualizing the audience hating me. I had the most complete negative visualization you can possibly have. So I went back I was living in New York at the time. When I went back to New York, I went to a friend of mine who was a yoga teacher and did meditation. And I said, look at what I've been doing. What do we do? And she said, we'll fix you right up. Let's create this gorgeous visualization of you walking into a room filled with love, a red carpet spreading out before you come in. It was just the most magnificent visualization you can think about, that I was surrounded with love, that everybody was clapping and applauding and loving what I had to say, and it was going into their heart. Well, I listened to that every single day. And little by little, I was able to get out there, and all of a sudden, the thing that I was worst at became the thing I was best at.
Oh, that's a great story. Yeah, I remember.
It wasn't all of a sudden. It was with a lot of work.
It's a years long practice. I mean, I remember when I was a grad student at Berkeley, we had to, in our second year, we had to put on a conference with some big thinkers, some professionals and academics. And
I'm
I
scared.
was given the task at the end of the day to kind of summarize what all these big minds had talked about. And so I get up there and I have my notes and I look down at the end of the aisleway and there was a video camera aimed right at me. And I was like, and
That's a great expression. Yeah.
And I think I just wrapped it up quickly. I didn't summarize it all. I panicked. And it took me years to get over that until a few years later, I was offered a radio show and that scared the crap out of me. But I knew because it scared me, I had to do it. So I started doing this daily primetime radio show and I was not good at the beginning. Like I couldn't relax. I couldn't emote. I couldn't tell a story. I couldn't tell a joke.
Wow.
But eventually with practice, I kind of eased into it and relaxed and slowly began to have more fun with it. And then got pretty good at it. So, I think part of it's practice, part of it's learning to face those fears.
Oh boy, is it ever. Is it ever. I was able to actually track it back at one point to what made me that fearful. Mm-hmm. And my parents were both lawyers. And when I was 16, I was always working in the office. I mean, it was like the family store.
Right.
And when I was 16 years old, I was sent to answer a case on behalf of the law firm. And I said, well, I don't know what to do. Now, I knew that my mother had me answer the case because she wanted to play golf. But I needed to go in there and lie to the judge. So I needed to go in there, stand up, represent the law firm. And it was small, but prominent.
Right.
They were both prominent in their field. She was a matrimonial lawyer. He was a criminal lawyer.
Don't screw it up.
So don't screw it up. And I stood there and I memorized what they told me to say. And I stood there and I did it. And the judge, and it was one of these courtrooms that you see on television, like Jamaica Supreme Court, where they used to record all these things. So the judge was way, way high up. And I was, all 5'2" of me was looking up like this. And he said to me, young lady, approach the bench. And I was just like, and he looked right down at me and he said, that's crap. Your mother's out playing golf somewhere. Go find her and tell her she doesn't get into this courtroom. I mean, I thought I would die. And of course, somewhere along the line, I forgot about that. But it wasn't until I realized that had traumatized me to the point, just like what the look you just had when you saw the camera. Who knew that these things traumatize us and keep us from doing what should be relatively easy to do?
Well, kind of. I mean, I like Faith Harper's definition of trauma, which is anything that disconnects us from a feeling of safety, which is kind of a low bar for trauma. But if you look back on your life and think, what disconnected me from a feeling of safety, you come up with some interesting answers. And some of those, I think, are going to be events or experiences that still affect us to this day.
I'm going to write that down. Because I'm actually, I was diagnosed a few years ago with PTSD, and I have been working through it. Something activated it, and I mean, I can tell you some of the situations, but I had no idea when you go into the study of yourself under that category, and you work with somebody that's a specialist in that, they make you do a timeline. Mm-hmm. And what I realized was, everybody has tough times in their life. I thought I was just super resilient because every time something happened, I would invent a new product. I would do something different. I was super, super resilient, but I discovered you can be too resilient because sometimes what you don't do is you're not really dealing with the pain. You're not dealing with the grief. You're shoving it down. And then I guess you get to a certain age and if something triggers it, man, it all goes.
Well, and it's interesting. I would say it's an and, not an or. In other words, I think that you're super resilient and you had some traumatic events that affected you.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So it's both, right?
Yeah. Oh, of course, everything's a both end. In my world, everything's a both end. And that kind of comes into the conversation that we're going to have today, too.
Yeah. And so let's go into the next question a little bit, because one of the things that I really push is I'm trying to help my clients become successful and happy, because in my experience, when I was young, I had a lot of success, but I wasn't happy.
Yeah.
So to me, that's not success, truly. So tell me your definitions of success and happiness, if you would.
Well, I think my definition of success is really about feeling peaceful in every area of my life. So peaceful and content about my work, and peaceful and content about my relationships, and peaceful and content about how I feel about myself physically. Am I in good health? Am I working out? Am I doing that? Peaceful and content in my spiritual life, in my connection with the mystery and the universe. So I think for me, happiness is when I'm feeling happiness is when I'm feeling connected to all of that. Success is when I'm not only feeling connected to it, but I'm not out of sync with it. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I think for me, happiness is about relationship. So it's relationship to self, it's relationship to others, it's relationship to our work. So feeling we've got meaningful work, and then relationship to something bigger than ourselves, which could be a variety of things.
Same thing. I use the word connection. You use the word relationship. It's exactly the same thing. Because when I'm in relationship, I'm feeling intertwined and connected.
So what myths do you find people think about happiness frequently?
Well, I think the biggest myth is I'll be happy when. I'll be happy when I get the promotion. I'll be happy when I get the raise. I'll be happy when I get the date. I'll be happy when. And I'll be successful. I'll be happy after I'm successful. That's the biggest myth. Right. Because it's actually happiness precedes success, as opposed to success preceding happiness. And I think that's the myth busting thing that we have to really get to, is that when happiness comes first, everything else comes easier. And
it's fascinating in the sense that that's one of the few causal relationships that we found in social sciences, or I should say that causal relationships are hard to find in social sciences. Usually we can say it's correlational, like you're happier when you're successful when you're happier. This one, we've done so much work on it that we found that no, it's in a direction that when you're happy, you're actually more successful or more likely to be successful.
Yeah. And there's a biological basis for that. And I think in my teaching, I think that's what saves me in my teaching, because I work a lot. I work a lot with men. I work for Vistage, which is an international organization of CEOs. And as hard as they try to get women involved, and they do, they're still overwhelmingly male. And here I come, a woman, in to talk about happiness. And so the first thing I go for is the science. So here's what happens when your body is in a state of happiness or positivity. Very often, I will discuss right up front and ask the question, how many people here don't even like the word happiness? Because I find that some people seem to have a bias against the word, because there's a sort of an unspoken thing of, it's not my job to make you happy kind of thing. That keeps coming up.
It's not masculine enough.
Well, it's not masculine enough. And it's not masculine enough. And so that's kind of come down through it. So very often, and I can read a room pretty quickly. So I will go in and I'll say, how many people here don't really like the word happiness and think it's all this fluff stuff? And, I see a few hands. I say, okay, good. For you, if you hear the word happiness come out of my mouth, please hear positivity. A state of positivity is what I'm talking about. There are 30 different kinds of positive emotions. So you can use this, so I start throwing positive emotions out, and then everybody's happy because they found one they can relate to.
Right.
And it may be contentment. It may be joy. It may be it may be serenity. There's a whole bunch of them. So that's the very first thing that I start talking about. I say, what would happen if you could do something to make your staff 3 to 10 times more creative? And all of a sudden the years go up, because creativity is connected to innovation. And what if there was something that you could do that would make them 31% more productive? So I give them the numbers that are related to what happens when people are happy at work. So now I'm getting a buy-in, because everybody wants their staff more productive. Everyone wants their staff being more creative, and they want better sales, and they want more profitability. Now we're so lucky, because when I started doing this, there weren't too many numbers. So now we're so lucky because we've got data coming from everywhere. And happiness is beginning, thank God, to be considered a KPI in business, and we can measure it. So now all of a sudden they hear the word measurement, and now I've got some buy-in, or I would rather say enrollment, into what I'm teaching. and people are open. Last week, I worked with 3 different groups out in Arkansas, and maybe it's the time we're living in. Maybe people are just ready to hear it, and that's possible. But I felt a greater sense of acceptance, curiosity, involvement, engagement in the audience, in the discussion of happiness. I got very little of that. No, not my job.
Yeah, I think that, when I started positive psychology work back probably 16 years ago, I was way ahead of the wave. And there was not much interest in it. And now I think there's much more acceptance, openness, and a willingness to learn.
Well, because you can't deny it. Mm-hmm. When you look at the biochemical, when you study the work of the people who have using functional MRIs, we look inside their brains, we can see what's going on. Mm-hmm. When you study the people that are actually working with the body chemicals, to say that, when you're in a state of happiness, your body is producing more endorphins. And when you're in the state of positivity, your body is producing more dopamine, or is producing more of the chemicals that are more beneficial for the body. There are some things now you can't deny. So I think we're being accepted because they can't overlook us anymore.
So, you do a lot of work with corporate culture. So switching gears just a little bit, tell me a little bit about what a positive corporate culture looks like. What does that feel like?
I'm glad you put the word feel in there.
Well,
yeah. Well, happy culture or positive culture, it's energetic in nature. If you're good at sensing energy and you walk into a positive culture, you can feel it. There's a sense of electricity in the air. There's a sense of excitement in the air. You can watch people interact. They generally have smiles on their faces. They lean into each other. Just like if you were sitting in a restaurant, wanted to look around and figure out which couples were in rapport or not in rapport, you can do that. You can see that in the workplace. You hear positive language. You hear more of the what's right and what's going well than what's broken, what's wrong, and how do we fix it. So you get to a point, and I'm sure you understand this, that when you are observing a situation, it's I see a little thing just flashed on my screen that said your internet is unstable. Okay.
I can still hear you. The video is just so that's okay.
That's all right. No, just a little unnerving in the middle of a podcast when you're on camera. But there's a sense of well-being about. People are excited to be with one another. They're stopping to talk to one another. You can see the connection happening. The language is positive.
Yeah,
people are focused on their dreams.
Pardon me for interrupting. One of the things I've seen is more questions, more you statements rather than I statements.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
So I'm more curious about what's your experience. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? Rather than telling you my perspective.
Yes, it's less directive and more collaborative. And there's a sense of curiosity, I think. I think it comes from curiosity. I'm really curious about what you think about that.
And then I would argue compassion as well.
Oh, absolutely.
And empathy.
Compassion, empathy, forgiveness, things that we hardly ever used to talk about in the workplace, you see all the time in a positive culture.
It's interesting. I was talking to a guy that worked at Facebook in charge of AI and machine learning. And he said he moved over from Motorola. Now, I know Facebook's not super popular right now in the public, but one of the things he was saying is that, in coming to Facebook, it was really interesting. They didn't have a huge, thick handbook of rules to follow. They basically had one major rule that they wanted everyone to kind of buy into. And the one idea is assume positive intent.
Yes.
And that's a really interesting one, because I think a lot of the ways that we go off the rails in relationships is we assume someone did something harmful to us on purpose, or that they don't have positive intent, that they were operating negatively with malice. And that's where a lot of relationships go awry, especially in the corporate world.
I call it noble intent. It's the same thing. Assume that the person that came to you had some kind of a noble or positive intent in what they were saying. That's something I learned many, many years ago when I studied NLP.
Okay.
Is to take that frame of assume that person had a positive reason for wanting to do whatever they did. Maybe they didn't have the skills to do it in the way that you would have liked them to do it, but assume that their intention was positive.
And I think one of the things that I talk to with a lot of people about is in terms of relationships, assume that you've got a bucket of positive emotion and negative emotion, and it's the little drops of resentment, annoyance, and hurt into that bucket that when you get enough of those that accumulate and they fill up the bucket, your framework goes from assuming positive intent to assuming negative intent.
Oh, that's really interesting.
And that can happen in romantic relationships, but it also can happen in the workplace. So you have to be aware of that dynamic, that where am I on that scale of 1 to 10? And is my framework, are my interpretations turning negative?
That's really interesting. I like that idea. I use this idea of an emotional bank account.
Yes.
And that we each have, I draw this crazy little picture, which hasn't gotten any better in 20 some odd years, that we each have a little checklist in our head, and there's a plus column and there's a minus column. And in every interaction at any touch point, so with an employee, with a customer, any interaction at any touch point, we're either putting a check mark in the plus column or we're putting a check mark in the minus column. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the total interaction with someone, we kind of add them up. If there were more pluses than there were minuses, we call that good. And if there were minuses, then there were pluses, then we call that bad. We call that a bad experience.
Yeah, and it's interesting. As you're talking, I was just thinking, I've been dealing with several executives recently who are in job search mode. They're looking for a new position. Mm-hmm. And consistently, the experience that they're having is pretty much awful in terms of every company that they've been contacting and how that company interacts with them as a potential new employee.
Isn't that amazing?
They get form letters, they don't get callbacks, they don't get responses. Uh-huh. They're just treated as nothing. And it really fascinates me that this is the way some of these high-tech companies, these up-and-coming companies, are willing to bring in new employees. It just starts their employees off with such a bad taste in their mouth. So, we talk about positive corporate culture, and I think it begins there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I watched my son-in-law go through a job search that lasted just for a really long period of time. And it was difficult, a very competitive marketplace. And, the feeling of a family sitting at the table, kids are involved, everybody else is involved. And you say, well, how did it go? I don't know. I haven't heard from them. I think I don't understand how any company that calls themselves a good company to work for can treat a potential applicant that way. Right. Can treat any human being that way. And I think that's really where we fall through the hole, even with the good companies, mm-hmm. is what happens when somebody's getting a new, the process of getting a new job, and how do we onboard people once they get there? Do we send them off to HR to fill out, 30 pounds of paper before we introduce them to people? Do we give them a buddy? How humane are we? And I think that's the piece that you're talking about. That's not even humane.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. I was also talking with a VP of corporate culture recently, and she was looking at how to kind of improve this huge company's corporate culture. And I was saying, well, here's an idea, do a 360 assessment and find out whichever managers or executives are on the bottom 10% in terms of their anger issues, fire all of them.
Yeah.
You want to improve your culture? Google found that the biggest predictor of a positive, effective group or team is psychological safety. What's the
absolutely
psychological safety? I would say anger in all its variations.
Absolutely. That's something we talk about a lot in the programs that I do. I call it a safe emotional environment. Mm-hmm. How do we create a safe emotional environment so people aren't constantly looking over their shoulders? Because you want everybody's energy focused in the direction of what your goals are. You don't want people going, am I going to be in trouble? If I say this, am I going to be, we used to have a word for it in the company that I worked for. Can I curse on your show?
Sure, please.
Okay. It's not too bad. But I found for many, many years in that culture, there always had to be someone that was in the shit box and that got picked on. And I was at a top level of management. So we're talking about a manager's meeting that's at a top level of management. And there's always seemed to be somebody that needed, and was sort of like, uh-oh, John's on his way out because, He's just been put in the shit box. And we would watch it over the years. And especially those of us, there were women in that group. And there were those of us who were really able to clearly see what was going on. But it was almost like it was one guy had to be on top, you know? And in order for one guy to be on top, one guy had to be at the bottom.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's that masculine pissing contest, that competitiveness where we do want to dominate, we do want to be top of the hill. And I think that really gets in the way of effective management.
Oh, absolutely, especially today. I mean, it was accepted to some degree in the old days, you know, but these aren't the old days anymore. And we're going to extinct ourselves if we don't start changing some of this behavior.
Like I was talking to a guy who works at a hedge fund on the East Coast, and he was saying, yeah, the partners there will just get on the loudspeaker and just tear guys a new asshole, pardon me, like over the loudspeaker, like, oh, John, you fucking asshole. Like, what are you thinking? Like, get your ass up here.
Yeah.
Wow. Seriously? Like that stuff's still going on?
Apparently it is.
And, you know, and then there's, you know, a place that people can go to buy cocaine in the hallway, and there's a certain bathroom that you go to do the cocaine. Mm-hmm. Wow.
Like, is this the 80s? What happened? Did they come back?
Yeah. I was really shocked.
I'm shocked to hear that. But that environment, that financial East Coast, New York environment may still be breeding that somehow. And when it's acceptable, and you know, then it's not only connected to money, it's to power, it's connected to money. Mm-hmm. So you got a double whammy there.
It gets back to values too. Like, what are your primary values?
Yeah.
And I think for many people, the primary values are and have been wealth and power. But, you know, I talk to a lot of men that achieve that, and they're, you know, 50 years old or so, but they find they're miserable. And that's why, you know, my push is success and happiness.
Well, it can happen both at the same time.
It can,
but I think it takes courage. I think for a man, it takes real courage to be vulnerable.
Yes.
I think it takes way more courage to be vulnerable than it does to push people around and be biological. You know, that's biological.
Yeah.
It says, gosh, we haven't evolved. We haven't moved past the crocodile brain. You know, I'm just gonna, you know, eat or be eaten. That kind of that's you know, so last century.
The difference between the caveman and the evolved caveman, right?
Yeah.
Are you giving in your biological impulses to your emotional side, or are we going to evolve and really work that prefrontal cortex, really work the emotional awareness, really work our communication skills, and become something better?
And I think that's really the value that you provide with this particular podcast that you do. I mean, to get people to understand that when you're in those negative emotions, you're turning off the neocortex. Mm-hmm. Might as well be you're shutting down the creative part of the brain.
Well, you're shutting down the learning part too. So if you're yelling at the CEO, yelling at your employees, you're putting them in a fearful state, fight, flight, freeze, and they can't learn, nor can they be creative, nor can they even think clearly. And then they're so scared to make a decision, they're just going to say yes to you and tell you what you want to hear.
That's right. And then they're going to get disengaged.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and then, well, and if they get actively disengaged, then they're purposely sabotaging stuff.
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. I had a wonderful thing happen with a young manager who was known as a hothead. I mean, the guy was a hothead. And when his head got hot, his face got red. So he was very expressive. And he was in the middle of a 2-day program that I was doing on positive leadership. And I talked a lot about working with people's strengths and about taking a step back and knowing the difference between reaction and response.
Very nice.
And the reaction was pretty much biological in nature, where we allowed ourselves to react. We weren't thinking about what our future was. So it's when you react, it's coming from the past. But when you respond, you take that moment to say, well, now, wait a minute, let me put this in perspective. You're thinking about your future and what's going to happen. So while he was at the workshop, something happened back at the shop. And a couple of his managers did something in a way that he would not have done it. And he suspected that they knew it was the way he would not have done it. Mm-hmm. So he wasn't assuming positive intent. Uh-huh. He was assuming those dirty SOBs were just, you know, that kind of thing, he had the attitude. But he was in the middle of this workshop. So he talked to me about it. And I said, you have to find another way to deal with it, and you'll get a totally different response. So we'd been talking about working from strengths and things like that. I said, what are the strengths of what would happen if all these people walked away tomorrow? What would happen if they got so angry at you that they just left? And he was like, well, then I'd really be up the creek, because these are my managers. I said, right. So let's see if we can find another. So we talked a little bit about it, but didn't really go terribly in depth. That night he sat down, and I got to give him a lot of credit for this. Mm-hmm. He sat down and he went through each person and what their strengths were and what they contributed to the organization. And when he got back and he called them all into his office, they all came in figuring somebody's going to get fired, because that was the usual protocol. Mm-hmm. And he called them in. I said, I just want you to all know that I'm very grateful for everything you do. And Bob, and he spoke to Bob about his strengths, and John, he spoke to John about his strengths. He went right down the line because he'd prepared. And then he said, and because you are such a powerful team, I'm really confused as to how this thing happened in the first place. So I'm sure you must have been thinking that you were doing good, but I need to understand what happened here so it can't happen again. He was like a totally different person. Now, mm-hmm. I talked to his staff members afterwards, and they were like, what did you do to him? Because he didn't get red-faced. He was able to act in an entirely different way.
And I think that's a beautiful story. One of the things I love about it is that boss gave them what they weren't expecting.
Yeah.
And I think that always puts the people receiving it in a state of like surprise, interest, and it makes them tune in a big way.
Yeah.
And it's a great way to go. I remember, so speaking about strengths, I remember I had an 18-year-old that he was oppositional defiant. He was the kid that would tell his teachers in high school, like, screw you, to their face, and a little bit hard to deal with. I loved this kid. And he got a job as a checker, like a bagger at the supermarket. And he was complaining about it to me, saying, man, the woman I work with, she's like 42. She's depressive. She complains all the time. She's just a drag to be around. Like, I don't really like this job. And I said, I kind of tapped into his strengths, one of which was, or is, social intelligence. So he's really good at interacting with a lot of people. And I said, well, why don't you play around with that strength at work? In other words, try to make every person that comes through your line, that's the best interaction with you that they have all day. And I said, you're not going to achieve it. You're going to fall short, but just try. And he's like, all right, whatever. So he goes and he tries this. And he said, I connected with over 50% of the people, and 50% of the people leaving my line left with a smile and a bounce in their step. And I benefited too. It's a win-win. If they get a positive boost, I do too. And his job, it wasn't great after that, but it was a lot better.
Well, that's what I call the spillover effect. Mm-hmm. Is that whenever we are in a positive mode and we share that with someone else, they share it with another who shares it with another. And when you take that from a business perspective, one of the exercises I do with my CEOs has a circle in the middle of the page with the word positive culture. And then it has lines extending out with lots of little other bubbles, if you will. So what's the effect of a positive culture? Okay, positive employees. Well, what's the effect of having positive employees? And these they just go crazy. And then, because I let them do it in groups. So everybody's playing off of everybody else and everybody's competing with everybody else. And then before we end the exercise, I said, I want you to go through and I want you to put a $sign next to everything that either saves you money or brings you money. And last week was so funny because in two of the groups, I had two of the groups that were in the two of the groups that were working on it together. Just take a big red pen and draw a giant $sign right across the top of it, because there isn't anything we do that isn't affected by positive culture. I said, okay, now I can go home.
That's a great exercise. I'm just taking notes on that one.
Oh, it's super wide.
We talked a little bit when we talked on the phone about sort of the effect of a CEO's energy or mood on a company's culture. Speak to that a little bit. You had a story that you shared that I thought was really powerful as well.
Well, I don't remember what story that was, but I've seen it so many. I've seen it so many times. Which story I shared with you?
I think it was about a CEO coming in upset or irritable.
And in the morning. In the morning.
Yeah, in the morning.
Yeah. He was one of my favorites. This was a company that was owned by two brothers, And and they were both sweet, wonderful people. I mean, picnics for the people, really great human beings. But when it came to work, the older brother was hyper focused. And when he would come, I don't know what happened at night that things went into his inbox, but when he would come in the morning, he would have a full inbox. So he would walk past people as if he had blinders on, and he would go to his inbox. He would pick up his stuff. He would turn around, he would walk to his office, and he never said hello to anybody. And this was causing a problem because nobody really knew, was he angry or just did he have his resting bitch face on? I don't know. That face. And now I've sort of built this into my presentations. What does your face look like when you're really focused on a problem? Your eyebrows get scrunched down. You may not be angry, but you sure as hell look angry. And so when other people are looking at you, and if they don't have information, they make stuff up. I call it the MSU syndrome, because when people aren't communicating about how they're feeling, everybody around them is going to make stuff up. So I told him, after I observed the behavior a few times, I said, look, part of the problem is you. Because these people need something from you. They need to know that it's a good day. You set the stage for the whole day because your energy is contagious. The CEO's energy, the manager's energy, the leader's energy is always going to be more contagious than anybody else's energy because they're in the position of power. So their energy actually then becomes more powerful. So it took a while. We finally got the younger brother and I finally got him to say, you know what? I think that when I come in tomorrow morning, I'm not going to go to my inbox. I think I'm going to go say hello to everybody. Now, of course, this particular guy didn't take any advice from me, even though he was paying me. But we figured out within 3 months, he came up with the idea all by himself. So his brother and I had been coaching him for 3 months, and then he would go, I got it. And at first I was a young consultant at the time. I was very upset. I was like, that's my idea. And then finally I realized that it doesn't matter. That's
good consulting right there.
I know.
That's how it works.
I guess but I didn't know that. I wasn't trained to be a consultant. I just became one. So it was that. But I think in every situation that I've ever been in, you can see it. You can see the body language of other people change when the boss walks in the room. So the CEO absolutely does have a responsibility to put themselves in another state. I call that, what are you broadcasting? So and that's the one term that I find when I talk to people after I've worked with their companies or if I have a long-term relationship with them, that's one term that weaves itself into the culture. Where someone say, hey, what are you broadcasting right now? Because of the electromagnetic field around our body, as you know, we broadcast our emotions to other people. So we don't have to say anything. We just have to be present when we're in that agitated state and people can feel it.
Yeah, and just to explain that electromagnetic field idea, that's a concept proven by Heart Math some years ago, where they showed that the human heart generates an electromagnetic field that can be measured 6 feet outside of the body. So if you're standing 6 to 12 feet away from someone, 2 to 12 feet away from someone, our electromagnetic fields are commingling. And so
absolutely.
That could be one of the explanations for empathy or the energy that we pick up from other people.
Yeah, and we have mirror neurons in our brains, which do the same thing. But I think a point to make with that, because I've studied with Heart Math, is that the electromagnetic field of the heart is 5,000 times more powerful than the electromagnetic field of the brain. I mean, the brain is nothing compared to the heart.
Neurons in the heart. I think there's about 30,000 brain cells in the heart.
Absolutely.
There's also neurons in our gut.
Yeah.
The entire nervous system. So there's actually 3 sort of brains in our body. But yeah, with regards to your CEO story, I call that the shit rolls downhill idea that, whatever the mood is at the top, it tends to devolve into the culture.
Every day.
Family as well. The dad comes home angry. He yells at the mom yells at the oldest son yells at the daughter kicks the dog. That kind of idea. And I love that story that you told because I think it's so pervasive. And one of the things that I'll talk to CEOs about is just that, and because I don't think that we can always be in a good mood. I think that I agree with you to try and elevate your mood, but there's some days when you're just, depressed or irritable. And And so I think in those situations, the idea is to go in and let people know, hey, I'm just in a rough mood, I'm grouchy, I'm irritable, whatever you can say, and it has nothing to do with you. And to just let people know that to not take your mood personally, because generally what we do with people in a position of power above us is we assume their emotional state has something to do with us. We take it personally, and it can mess up productivity, it can mess up their day. So just to give people the freedom to either help you out and support you or just back off and leave you alone, I think is a great gift.
And I recommend to people that we all do get into those states, and we can sit in the car for an extra minute or two before we get out of the car. We can take our hand, we can put it over our hearts, because that's going to start the flow of oxytocin in the body, which naturally is going to work against the flow of testosterone, which might be at work, or adrenaline, which might be at work, or cortisol, which might be at work, especially if you're upset or angry. To sort of counteract that, to simply put your hand on your heart and for a moment think about something that you're truly grateful for. And really sink into the emotion, not just, oh, I'm grateful for my wife and kids, but really sit there and sink into it and hang in there for 30 seconds or more.
Absolutely.
And with that feeling of gratitude, because then that changes everything.
Right. And to the extent that's a daily practice, I would suggest that you've got to train yourself to be grateful for different things. It can't be the same thing.
Can't be the same thing.
The other thing I'll suggest is on the way home, when you've got a C-level exec or a manager coming home, that they stop at a park or a river or a creek and just look at nature for 3 to 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And exhale and focus on your breath and remind yourself that right now I am switching hats. I'm switching roles. I'm going from CEO to father.
Oh, beautiful.
Because it's a completely different role, and you don't want to bring home the stress and anguish from work to your family.
No, I get that. I was telling a funny story to the group this week. I was under so much stress at one point in the corporate job that I had. I was living in a blended family, which has built into it a lot of stress right there. And I would come home at night and I was just sometimes really unraveled. And at one point, the children were trained that we didn't have a garage, so I pulled the car in the driveway, that someone would, when they heard my car come in the driveway, one of the kids would be standing there literally with a glass of wine like this. And they would hold their hand out and say, "Here, Mom." And they'd give me this glass of wine so that I could have a glass of wine before I actually would be. And part of the problem was I lived so close to work.
Yeah.
That in the not quite 15-minute drive home, I didn't have time to begin to unwind the day. I was usually already pushing the time because it was already 6:30 or 7, and the man that I lived with had the early shift in his day, so he's really ready for dinner. So we had opposite time clocks. So it was, how can you get Mom to slam into relaxation real quick? Just get her to drink. Not a great way to train your children.
Great training. And I remember I spoke with a single father who was also a C-level executive, and he had 2 kids that were like 10 and 12. And I remember he had a rule that he would come home, and the rule was 10 and 10. So when I get home, give me 10 minutes and 10 feet.
I like it.
Close, he could breathe, he could ease into that role of father. And I thought I loved that as well. So another great idea.
I'm doing a spousal retreat in December. So it's always nice. I'd like to pick up little tips. I haven't done one in about a year. Mm-hmm. So it's always nice to pick up little tips about, if you want me to be happy when I get home, here's how you need to treat me.
Yeah. And so shifting gears a little bit. So let's go into just a brief discussion about testosterone and adrenaline and what role that you think that might enter into C-level execs' behavior. Well,
and this is, I don't know that there's any science about this. This is just an observation on my part. Over the years, I've worked with very fast-growing companies. One, because for years I spoke on the circuit for Inc. magazine. So these were all fast-growing companies. And 2, because I work with Vistage. So I'm working with CEOs of companies that are very successful. And many times they grow very, very quickly. And my observation has been that there comes a point where the people that work for them are now tired. There was a big vision, and we're all going to stay and eat pizza and shove stuff in bags and get it out the door. And, everybody's on board. Everybody's on board. Everybody's on board. Everybody's on board. But then when top management, I won't just say CEOs because it's never just a single situation. When top management is all male and all on board and pushing for that next goal, I think that the blend that happens between the testosterone and the adrenaline causes them to not be able to think well about all the other people in the organization, because they're not able to see it. And the corporation I grew up in was the same way. Fast growing. You know what? Don't call a meeting at 5:30. Some of us have to go home and feed our kids. But 5:30, sort of all hands on deck for the management team. We have something we need to talk about. Why do we have to talk about it at 5:30? And that's the kind of stuff that I've observed over and over again, is that there's a blindness. There becomes a blind spot. And I actually think it's the testosterone and the adrenaline mixing together. The only data I have found is data that's been done on, is a research that's been done on people called quants. Mm-hmm. And quants are people who work in the stock market, I guess, or the field of trading. And it's like they get really high, and they start using poor judgment and going out on margin, doing all the wrong things because they lose their judgment. So I wish there was more work done on this, because I think we would be able to, because I've seen it over and over again, because they don't have the ability, and I'm thinking about one man in particular who I adore, but he stopped having the ability to be empathetic to what the people at the lower end, the people that did the work in his organization were going through. They didn't have the excitement anymore. They were exhausted.
Yeah, and I have seen research, and I couldn't point to it, but I remember seeing research that showed that people, as they become more wealthy and powerful, tend to lose empathy for people, quote unquote, below them. Yeah. And so I think that enters into it as well. If you don't have empathy for how the people below you are feeling or the energy level that they have left, people below you in the hierarchy, you're in trouble, because then you're just going to push. The other idea that I really like that enters into this, that I heard when I interviewed William Pullen, who's a psychotherapist in London, is the idea that a true alpha male, I think so many of the alpha males out there, are people that consider themselves alpha males, want to be on top. They get really competitive. They get really into upward social comparison. So, they want the $80 million jet if you've got the $60 million jet, that kind of thinking.
Yes.
But I love the definition of the true alpha male is the man, well, let's say alpha is the man or woman who can get other alphas to cooperate. And so it's really an emphasis on communication and empathy and skills to get others to cooperate with each other. And I just love that idea.
I do too, because I think that's, if you look at the state of the world right now, isn't that what we need?
Yeah,
exactly what we need. We need a massive dose of that, and I'm wondering if we can't put that in a nasal spray.
Well, they have an oxytocin nasal spray, well,
that's why I'm thinking about it. I watched something the other day, and I said to myself, it was about some research they did in Germany. And I'm saying to myself, you know what? I'm going to see if I can buy that stuff, because they don't sell it here in the U.S.
No.
And they do have oxytocin. They do all kinds of experiments with mice and rats and animals, but they're doing human experiments now with oxytocin.
Yeah, and the results are encouraging.
The results are encouraging, but it also says, if you truly buy into, if you truly understand that by putting your hand on your heart, you will start the flow of oxytocin, or go find a baby or a puppy to pick up.
Mm-hmm.
Or look at, find something to cuddle, I think this whole idea about being able to manipulate the chemicals in your own body is amazing.
Yeah, it was interesting. A few years ago, I was doing work with a marketing company headed by a Stanford psychiatrist who had come up with this new methodology to get at how you feel about something consciously and subconsciously. And so I was looking at the methodology, and I was like, okay, that's interesting. Maybe it gets at that. But one of the problems when you're dealing with emotion and studying emotion is, how do you get people at a baseline in order to measure the effect of something. So if, people are going to come in irritated, anxious, stressed, happy, relaxed, but they're all over the map. And so one of the ideas which they eventually used that I had was, let's put a short video clip in there of a laughing baby.
Are you going to
So everyone will get that oxytocin dump and they come down and they relax. And then let's measure how they feel about a product.
Wow. They do, you must know this from positive psychology study. They've done this with doctors. They don't give them laughing babies. They give them candy. And when you prime a doctor for a positive emotion, they are more likely to, I think that statistic was 19% more accurate in their diagnosis.
Yeah. And that gift was small. It was like 3 Hershey's Kisses, if I remember correctly.
Is that what they gave them, 3 Hershey's Kisses?
Yeah, that was Alice Ison's work. And she also did some work where she would put a quarter in a payphone when they had payphones, and she would see what's the physiological or the behavioral effects of just finding a quarter in a payphone. And the behavioral effects were huge. I mean, to your point, they were massive from little bursts of positive emotion.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Barbara Fredrickson, I studied with Barbara Fredrickson too, and she calls micro moments of positivity. Mm-hmm. And in her book, Love 2.0, because we took a master class with her in Love 2.0. And that's really what it's about. It's these micro doses, these little micro moments of positivity that begin to add up. And she believes that's what love is about, that love isn't necessarily something that is, long lasting and forever, but that it's the continual, deliberate creation of these micro moments. And since studying her work, I'm much more deliberate when I'm in a supermarket, when I'm out in public, when I'm walking along the beach. I'm just so much more deliberate about looking at people, smiling at people, complimenting people, and just trying to do something to connect with them at that level to make them feel better, and then walk away feeling like, wow, that person looked kind of grumpy, but now she's got a smile on her face.
Yeah. And I love the idea about just being more mindful and aware of catching positive emotions in the moment, because one of the ideas from positive psych that I love is that positive emotions are fleeting and fragile. So they don't last as long. They're not as loud as negative emotions. Negative emotions scream at us. Positive emotions whisper. And if we overthink them, they can disappear. And so to train ourselves to be on the lookout, like you were saying, for, using birds as they fly away to remind you to be grateful, or to look at nature, or to look at a baby, or to interact with a puppy, or to smile at the stranger, or to seek to make, that employee who's below you in the corporate hierarchy smile. I think those are all hugely beneficial.
Absolutely. There is a quote that I use all the time, and it's Dr. Olaf Isaacson, who wrote the Entrepreneurial Elite. And I had the pleasure of studying with him once, and I will never forget him. He said, you can't motivate people. People motivate themselves. But what you can do is to create an environment where people feel good about themselves in your presence. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
And that's what I strive to do, is to help. It was so influential to me. That's really what I try to do, is to help people create an environment where others will feel good about themselves in your very presence.
Yeah.
And that makes the job of leadership easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just wrapping this up, which has been an amazing interview. Thank you very much. What's the best tool that you can share to help the listeners become Evolved Caveman?
I think the best tool is the one I've already shared, and just doing it as a practice. There's one that I teach called the appreciation audit. And because we know that neurons that fire together wire together, what we know is what we have to do is rewire our brains. Mm-hmm. So we're not constantly going out. The brain is not created to make us happy. The brain is there to keep us safe. Its job is not to make us happy. So if we want to be happy, we have to outsmart our happiness set point. We didn't have a chance to talk about that, but we all have one. And very often, people at the top these are people that are strivers. They're focused, they're technical. They're not necessarily happy people. So if you want to outsmart that happiness set point, you have to create new neural pathways. So one way that I recommend to do it is through what I call the appreciation audit. So 3 to 5 times during the day, And do it, when you're filling your coffee cup or your water bottle, or you're doing something else that's already routine. Stop what you're doing and write down 3 to 5 things that you appreciate. Different things, like you said, different things every time. And do it as a practice, like a martial artist would. Do it as a practice. And within a very short period of time, you've trained your brain to look for things to appreciate. And then train yourself to speak them out loud. To say to somebody, I really appreciate the way you, whatever. I really appreciate the fact that you chimed in the meeting yesterday. That was courageous of you, and I so appreciated what you had to say. Once you begin to do that, without thinking that you're babying people, or that you're, a lot of the challenge that goes on between the generations right now is because the older generations seem to think that what we're saying the younger generations need is babying them. Mm-hmm. And it's not. It's not. The human body actually works better when there's 5 times more positivity than negativity. So it's going in the way that science is going and learning. But I think we have to teach our executives to look for the good, 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 and then to be able to express it in a way that is that's framed inside the company's values or goals, so people are connected. Does that make sense?
Makes complete sense. I think it's a great tool to offer, and I think it's so powerful to train ourselves to look for what we appreciate in ourselves and in others at work and at home. Because I see a dearth of it in our relationships as well, our romantic relationships. I also would offer that, to look for the strengths in other people and speak to strengths or values.
Absolutely.
Seems to be a little bit more powerful than, why I really like your shoes.
Oh, yeah.
Say something like, wow, I was really impressed with the courage you showed in speaking up at the meeting today to the boss. Like, that was really badass. And when you can something like that and be sincere, I think is huge.
Well, when you can train yourself, it's another exercise I do in my workshops. It's listening for strengths. So when I use this little crazy, like, put on the big strengths listing ears, I make it exaggerated and weird, because I know that I'm dealing with busy brains of executives. So I have to get them to do something to say, okay, the only thing I'm going to do for the next 3 minutes is put on these ears that can only hear strengths. And I give them an exercise they can use. They do it, and then they can use it at other times. That begins to teach them. There's also the observance of body posture. And when someone's in their strengths, they're very animated. They speak differently. They stand differently. So I do teach them to ask the question, what are you proud of? So if somebody comes in after a long weekend and they say, what'd you do over the weekend? As they're telling them the story, they ask one question. So what's one thing you did you're really proud of? And when you say that, someone will literally give you a clue as to what their strengths are. Then that becomes the thing that you can feed back to them over and over again, because now you've just seen one of their strengths. You can also use a tool. You can use a strength finder or the via character strengths. But it's so wonderful when someone can just learn to listen for someone's strengths.
Yeah, I love the question of what are you proud of?
Oh, it's great to do with your kids.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, so JoAnna, thank you so much. This has been a blast. I've really enjoyed this. So tell me how people can get in touch with you on the web or social media if they would like to.
Okay. Well, on the web, I'm at returnonhappiness.com. And there's a special page set up, returnonhappiness.com/happy place. And that'll give you a little report on how to make your workplace a happy place. I'm also at positiveenergizer.com. That's my online course that's incorporated all this emotionally intelligent stuff in a do-it-yourself program, which an executive can use him or herself or do as a group. That will kind of raise that level of emotional intelligence so they become an energizer. I am on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. Keep them happy. That's my handle on Twitter. Keep them happy. I don't tweet too much, though.
Okay.
And there is a JoAnna Brandi and Company Facebook page as well. We're out there enough.
Okay.
Well, not enough to make me nuts, but enough.
Put all those links in the show notes. So if anyone's interested, they can go to show notes and click on those. And as I said, JoAnna, this has been fantastic. I love talking positive psychology. I love talking corporate culture. So thank you so much for coming on and joining me.
Oh, thank you. And it shows that you love it. So thank you so much. This has been a blast for me too.
All right. And that is it for this episode of The Evolved Caveman. Be sure to like, rate, and review and help me out. That would help me out so much. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Evolved Caveman podcast. If you like what you've heard, support us by subscribing, leaving reviews, and sharing the podcast with friends and colleagues. For the latest, most powerful tools to connect with like-minded men, join the Facebook group at The Evolved Caveman. Follow Dr. John on Instagram at The Evolved Caveman, all one word, or join the email list by visiting guidetoself.com.